The air held a perpetual coolness, like the first hints of autumn that never fully gave way to winter. It was difficult to believe the sun had never truly returned after the series of partial eclipses began years ago. Once, people took for granted the warmth of daylight, the tapestry of shadows beneath their feet, and the simple joy of looking up at a bright, cloudless sky. Yet for as long as most could remember now, the world remained locked in a half-light, a twilight that stretched across continents in a dim, endless dusk. Every few weeks, the black disk of the moon would shift enough to tease a moment of weaker sunlight. But it was fleeting, as if the universe had decided that humans no longer deserved to walk freely in daylight. In one of the few remaining inhabited regions, a wasteland city of battered metal and scorched earth, lived a survivor named Kian. He was a lean man with sharp cheekbones and a quiet demeanor. His ragged coat had been mended so many times it sported more patches of mismatched fabric than original cloth. Kian navigated the half-ruined streets with a steady stride, footsteps echoing off walls stripped of paint by the relentless winds. Once a thriving commercial hub, the city had collapsed under the weight of famine, riots, and the unstoppable dust storms that battered it. Boarded-up shops and gutted skyscrapers loomed against a sky tinted bronze, forever showing the faint curve of the moon gnawing at the sun's face. He remembered the early days well. Scientists had initially believed the phenomenon would pass, a freak astronomical arrangement that would correct itself in a matter of weeks. But the sun's light remained partially obscured day after day, and weeks soon became months. Governments scrambled to understand the cause. Theories emerged, some plausible, others verging on conspiratorial mania. Eventually, scientific consensus landed on the idea that Earth's orbit and the Moon's orbit had drifted into a once-in-a-zillion alignment, locking them into perpetual near eclipse. Yet no consensus ever explained why the alignment never broke. The planet cooled, crops failed, and populations migrated in desperate search of stable conditions. Kian survived by scavenging. He had a knack for finding supplies in ruined buildings that others missed. Whether that was a forgotten can of beans, a half-broken flashlight with salvageable batteries, or a coat left behind in a closet. With each success, Kian snatched small victories from the abiding gloom. But the city had become a dangerous place. Human factions that once banded together in common desperation began to fracture, forging alliances that boded ill for those who ventured into their territories. Kian learned how to move quickly and quietly. He didn't trust easily. Each stranger he encountered could just as soon trade for supplies as rob him blind. One particular day, the sky was thicker with low-lying dust than usual, blowing in from the desert beyond what used to be farmland. Kian pulled the collar of his coat closer, adjusting the tattered scarf around his face. He was on one of his routine foraging runs, slipping through an alley where battered dumpsters lined the walls. The stench of decay was stronger than ever, a sign that someone, or something, had found refuge in that cramped space. He paused, listening intently, the hush of perpetual twilight making even the slightest sound betray potential danger. The strangest motion caught his eye, a flicker of movement beneath a collapsed metal beam that had torn free from a structure above. Curiosity warred with caution. After a cautious moment of scanning the area, Kian edged forward, crouching at the beam's side, ready to leap backward if threatened. A soft whimper emerged from the gloom. Beneath the beam lay a teenaged boy wrapped in blankets. The boy looked pale under the meager dusk-like light. When he saw Kian, his eyes went wide, and behind that fear there was unmistakable relief. Kian knew the expression too well. The boy probably had nowhere else to go. Kian knelt, careful not to spook him. "You okay?" The boy's voice came out shaky. "I got trapped. This beam fell when I was trying to climb up for a better vantage point. I heard a scuffle in the alley, tried to hide, and ended up pinned." Kian glanced around, noticing the structural damage. It wouldn't take much to free the beam if he had some leverage. With effort, he wedged a long metal rod beneath the beam and hoisted it upward. The boy crawled out, favoring a bruised leg. "Thanks," he mumbled. "I'm Rayo." "Kian." He nodded, gauging the boy's injuries. "You need help walking?" Rayo shook his head, but his expression said otherwise. Leaning heavily on the wall, he attempted a few steps. "I'll manage." Silence followed. Kian considered walking away. He couldn't afford another mouth to feed, but leaving a boy alone in this apocalypse felt wrong. Even in a world that had lost almost all sense of community, some humanity persisted, at least in Kian's heart. And Ryo's haunted eyes made him remember a younger self, afraid and alone, after the day his own parents vanished in the chaos of mass migration. "You got a place to go?" Kian asked slowly. Ryo lowered his gaze, not answering. In his silence, Kian found all he needed to know. "Come with me," he said curtly, turning to go. "Rest of the city's not safe." At first, Ryo trailed behind, stumbling, as though uncertain if the offer was genuine. But with no better alternative, he trusted there might be sanctuary somewhere in the battered maze of half-destroyed buildings. Kian led him to the remains of a library. It wasn't a typical hideout, but that unpredictability was precisely why he used it. The front facade was caved in, and endless shelves lay smashed on the ground. Deeper inside, up a winding staircase to what used to be a reading loft, a vantage point offered views of the city's major avenues. The structure was precarious, but Kian knew which steps to avoid. There, in the corner, behind a half-toppled bookshelf, he had carved out a living space. Bedding made of scavenged blankets and pillows formed a makeshift shelter from the cold. Ryo's eyes widened at the pockets of relative comfort, a stark contrast to the bleak city they had just walked through. The boy settled into one of the blankets, quietly grateful. Kian retrieved a dented tin can from his pack, opening it with an ancient can opener. A faint scent of preserved meat drifted into the musty air. Ryo's eyes lit up, the small portion of food representing a banquet in this dim existence. As Ryo ate, Kian climbed to the highest vantage point on the loft, scanning the horizon through cracked windows. A storm was gathering in the distance, swirling dust across the silhouette of crumbling skyscrapers. Even with the permanent twilight, some daylight lingered occasionally, illuminating dust motes in the air. He observed carefully, knowing that fierce storms brought more than howling winds. They often drove desperate people closer to the heart of the city, scavengers ready to fight for whatever they could find. Over the next few days, Ryo's leg healed. He insisted on joining Kian during foraging trips, learning how to move silently in the shadows. The city's gloom was double-layered now. The cosmic shroud that turned midday into dusk, and the fine film of dust that settled over every surface. At times, Kian glimpsed flickers of the boy's spirit, like when he marveled at a battered paperback book they found, or attempted to fish out lost supplies from beneath collapsed beams. But each flicker was laced with desperation. Neither had illusions. If they couldn't find enough food, they would starve, or face the scavenger gangs that roamed the city. On one frigid evening, they took shelter as a swirling dust storm ripped through. Huddled by the faint lantern glow, Ryo found an old book that looked half intact, the cover ragged but the spine still holding together. With the dim light, he began to read aloud. Kian listened, partly in curiosity, partly for comfort. The text spoke of a time before the eclipses, describing bright mornings, shimmering noon heat, and summer nights lit by fireflies rather than an eerie half-light. The voice of the boy reading painted images Kian had nearly forgotten. Children running barefoot on sun-warmed grass, fields of sunflowers, the horizon bathed in orange as the sun set. Outside the library, the wind howled, each gust a reminder of the present reality. But in that moment the two felt an inexplicable hope. The idea that even if the sun never returned in full, the memory of it lived on in words and stories. However, hope was fragile in this world. Rumors spread of a large gang setting up new territories in the heart of the city, occupying the old museums and municipal buildings, controlling what was left of the public water pumps. Once, those pumps drew underground reserves that had not yet been secured by any single faction. Now, the gang's soldiers patrolled around them, charging a toll from anyone who wanted a drink. A few travelers whispered that worship-like forms of devotion had sprung up around these scarce water sources, with the gang's leader presenting himself as an anointed figure. Faith and desperation often mingle unpredictably in an apocalypse. Kian suspected that if they wanted to survive, they would need to relocate or find a way to secure their own water supply. It was after one particularly unfruitful scavenging trip that he broached the idea to Reo. The boy was sorting through a tangle of wires they had salvaged from an electronics store, hoping to build a workable radio. When Kian explained that they might need to move out of the city if conditions deteriorated, Reo froze. "You've heard the rumors, right?" Reo said in a voice that betrayed uncertainty. "They say outside the city it's just endless desert, sand and dust so thick you can't see." "Where would we go?" Kian swallowed. "I don't know. Maybe some farmland to the north still has something, or we can try to find survivors in the valleys where water might still exist. Staying here with the gangs growing stronger might be worse." Reo didn't answer immediately. Instead, he flipped a switch on the jerry-rigged radio. Static buzzed, crackling in the silence. He tweaked the dial, and for a fleeting moment they heard faint voices. Could be from a settlement somewhere else, or just leftover broadcast from an abandoned channel. Tuning carefully, Reo caught a muffled fragment of speech. "If anyone can hear me, travel south. Rumors of..." Then the signal vanished. They stared at the speaker, waiting. The static returned. Reo tried again, but the fleeting voice was gone like a ghost. Kian wondered if they had heard right. Was there really something to the south? They decided to wait a few more days, collect supplies, and then make a final decision. The next morning, to their surprise, they found footprints outside the library's entrance. Fresh footprints. Maybe 2 or 3 people. Most ominously, the prints did not appear to recede in any other direction, which meant whoever had come might still be nearby. Kian and Reo exchanged anxious glances. "We need to leave," Kian said, his voice low. They quickly gathered the essentials: food cans, the makeshift lantern, matches, blankets, the unfinished radio. Within an hour, they slipped out the library's side exit, treading carefully past broken furniture. The covering swirl of dust aided them, making it harder for watchers to track their departure. They steered clear of the city's central square, taking a meandering route through half-erected residential towers. Their goal was to reach the outskirts, where the city bled into a barren tract of farmland. But moving behind trembling structures was dangerous. Remnants of steel and concrete threatened to collapse at any moment. They skirted these hazards cautiously, listening for distant cries or footsteps. Around midday, though, midday meant only slightly brighter skies, the wind died briefly, offering a rare stillness. Kian and Reo crouched behind what used to be an office building's lobby, now piled with shattered glass. A rusted revolving door yawned open to the street. Just beyond, silhouettes moved slowly between the ruins. Kian signaled for silence, both of them straining to discern if these were inhabitants or a gang's patrol. A grating voice echoed off the walls. "Nobody here, let's move on," it barked, followed by footsteps crunching debris. Kian and Reo waited with bated breath until the echoes vanished into the gloom. Then, carefully, they pressed onward, hearts pounding. By the time they exited the city proper, the overhead sky had dimmed further, drifting toward the perpetual near night the world was forced to endure. Ahead lay a dusty plain, once farmland, now riddled with cracked irrigation ditches and the skeletal remains of dead trees. The black shadow of the moon still bit into the sun's disk, a cosmic reminder that the earth was trapped in celestial misalignment. They surveyed the landscape, deciding on a direction. With no clear path, Kian trusted his intuition: head southeast, following the faint memory of old roads and power lines. Perhaps they would find a settlement or even stumble upon the source of that radio broadcast. That first day outside the city was brutal. The ground was gritty beneath their boots, and the wind battered them without the shielding effect of tall buildings. After covering several miles, their canteens ran low. When night took hold in full, they found shelter in the skeletal husk of a barn. Inside, rodents scurried at their approach, leaving behind droppings and straw that smelled of mold, yet it offered a break from the gusts. They took turns standing watch, reluctant to fall asleep lest something or someone crept up on them. Morning brought no blessed dawn, just a slightly lighter gloom. Beale rubbed the sleep from his eyes, rummaging for breakfast, a meager serving of canned vegetables that tasted metallic and sour. Keon studied the horizon through a gap in the barn's wooden slats. He saw movement, a distant glow. A fire, perhaps? He beckoned for Rio to approach the gap and see for himself. They packed again and set out, footsteps crunching across dried farmland. The glow disappeared behind rolling dust, but they followed the general direction. About an hour later, they spied faint shapes in the haze. A few large tents, a stand of battered vehicles with missing tires, and makeshift barricades of corrugated metal. Smoke rose from a barrel fire in the center, drifting into the oppressive twilight. "We approach carefully," Keon whispered. Rio nodded, staying behind him as they crept closer. Their plan was to scout first, judge the inhabitants' temperament, but as they neared, a lone figure spotted them, eyes reflecting a mixture of caution and fear. The figure shouted, and more people emerged, brandishing rifles and improvised spears. Keon froze, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. Rio did the same. An older woman wrapped in a heavy coat lined with fur stepped forward and studied them. Her faded hair framed a face lined with worry. After a moment, she gestured for them to come nearer. "Keen eyes, those," she said quietly, nodding at Keon's and Rio's readied posture. "We've had trouble with raiders. You don't look like raiders, though. You want to trade? Or are you just passing through?" Keon cleared his throat. "Both, maybe. We're from up north, the city's center. It's getting too rough there. We heard rumors on a radio broadcast, something about heading south." The woman exchanged glances with a few others who had come out to see the strangers. "You heard that broadcast, then?" "We've heard it too, but can't get a clear read on it. We're low on parts, so we can't fix our radio. But yes, the rumor is that there's a farmland cooperative in the south, or maybe a valley that's less affected by the cold. We're deciding whether to make the journey or not." "What's the problem?" Areo asked, curiosity overriding caution. "It's a long way, and these dust storms, they've taken lives. We lost a few scouts who went searching for a safer route. Never saw them again. Could be they got stranded or crossed paths with dangerous folks. And there's a worry some of these stories are just false hopes, meant to lure wanderers into traps. But we'd rather risk it than starve here." Keon and Reo looked at each other. In the woman's words, they recognized their own dilemma. Remain in a failing region or gamble on the unknown. With a silent nod, Keon stepped forward. "We'll join you, if you'll have us. We have some supplies, not a lot, but we can work, help protect the camp. Neither of us wants to wander alone in the dark." Assessing the sincerity in his voice, the woman introduced herself as Sabine, the unofficial leader of this ragtag group. She ushered Keon and Rio into the midst of their encampment. A handful of families had gathered there, along with a few lone survivors. They had old vehicles that wouldn't start but served as shelter. Fire barrels warmed them at night, fueled by whatever scraps of wood or old furniture they could salvage. The group had a minimal water supply siphoned from the ground by a hand pump that tapped into a shallow well. It was brackish, but it was water. The next few weeks blended into a tense waiting game. Keon and Reo helped fortify the barricades, hammered metal sheets onto frames to create windbreaks, and scavenged in the surrounding farmland for anything of value. Areo also tinkered with his salvaged radio, sometimes coaxing out faint static and broken voices. Morale in the camp fluctuated with each passing day. Some insisted they should leave sooner rather than later. Others argued they needed to amass more supplies first. Through it all, the sky remained a dismal monotony of faint sun and looming shadow. Then one night, without warning, the radio burst into a clearer signal. Rio jolted awake from his doze and scrambled to adjust the frequency. Voices emerged, though scratchy. Everyone in the camp instantly gathered around, as though huddling around an ancient oracle. The voice was male, speaking slowly. "If you can hear me, cooperative farmland safe from the storms. There is enough water for refugees. Coordinates 34 southwest, 177 west. West brings seeds if possible. Join us." It was the most detailed information they had ever received, Sabine jotted it down. A murmur of excitement fell over the small crowd. Real coordinates, real direction. Abruptly, the broadcast ended, replaced once again by static. Everyone stared at each other, hearts racing with cautious hope. They tuned in, waiting for more, but nothing else came through. The following morning, the camp bustled with renewed energy. Sabine declared they would depart within a week. They needed that time to gather resources, repair or modify the vehicles if possible, and map out a route. Kian watched the sky, noticing that the sun's disk was nearly half shuttered as always. But maybe, just maybe, he caught a glimmer of slightly brighter light than before. A trick of the gloom, or perhaps a sign. During the preparations, tensions ran high. Families bickered over supply sharing, a few men argued about which route was safest, and the children's fearful gazes weighed heavily on everyone's hearts. Yet each day they made small strides, filling water containers, collecting seeds from old industrial farmland, if they still had any viability left, and distributing what meager food supplies they had. Ian and Reo found themselves in the thick of it, helping coordinate tasks, forging quiet friendships with a handful of the survivors. At last, the morning of departure arrived. Sabine's group loaded the supplies onto 2 old pickup trucks, each rigged with battered trailer attachments. A small number of survivors recognized they would probably have to walk if the trucks gave out, but the trucks would carry the bulk of the water containers and possessions, keeping them away from the choking dust. No one was under any illusions. It would be a hard trip, possibly lethal. Yet, as they rolled away from the makeshift camp, wheels crunching dried soil, a faint communal sense of optimism pervaded. For once, they were not drifting aimlessly. They had coordinates, a possible destination. Even the copper horizon, feebly backlit by the haunted sun, seemed to glow a shade lighter, as though encouraging them onward. They made slow progress. The battered engines frequently overheated, forcing stops to let them cool. Dust storms loomed on the horizon, and everyone gripped whatever they could when fierce winds threatened to tip the trailers. Occasionally they paused to salvage fuel from abandoned vehicles along the way. Ario insisted on turning on the radio at intervals to see if they caught more transmissions. Sometimes they heard only static, other times they picked up broken bits of a female voice singing an old folk song. Or perhaps it was just the echo of signals bouncing across corridors of dust-laden atmosphere. No one knew for sure. On the night of the 5th day, after a grinding journey, they found partial shelter in a canyon-like depression carved by a dried river. Huddled around a flickering campfire, the group ate what could pass for a meal, boiled oats and rehydrated vegetables. As Kian gazed around at his companions, an odd sensation filled him. He was no longer alone. Reo's leaning against a rock, fiddling with the radio. Sabine oversaw a group unpacking bedrolls. Others prepared for the night watch. For so long, Kian had wandered alone, surviving by a sense of self-preservation. Now he felt part of something bigger. He also allowed himself one delicate, almost perilous emotion: hope. If they kept traveling and reached those coordinates, maybe they would find farmland that could support crops. Maybe the broadcast was real, and good people waited there to rebuild civilization under the dim sky. He imagined a small community with greenhouses to trap the meager sunlight, water captured from hidden springs, and guardians posted at the perimeter to keep out raiders. If it existed, it was worth risking everything to reach it. When he closed his eyes, he pictured a day when the sun might break free from the moon's grasp. Though scientists said it was permanent, no arrangement in the cosmos was truly eternal. One day, the moon might shift just enough to let sunlight pour across the continents again. Perhaps it wouldn't happen in his lifetime, yet the mere thought of that possibility, that future generations might once again walk in warm golden daylight, brought a small smile to his lips. Morning came, or what passed for morning, and they continued on. Over the next stretch, they encountered new obstacles, roads that turned into rock-strewn passes, improvised blockades from unknown travelers, scorching dryness that made every breath feel like sandpaper. But they also found small triumphs, a trickle of water from a cracked underground pipeline that refilled their supply, half a crate of rancid but partly usable medical supplies in a toppled cargo truck. Each scarce find was a reminder that the planet still had scattered remnants to offer those brave or desperate enough to seek them. At the center of it all remained the unrelenting Twilight. Staring at the horizon, every person in that convoy wondered the same thing. What if the farmland turned out to be a myth? What if they made the trek only to find ruins or a trap laid by raiders? Yet forward they pressed, clinging to a flickering faith in tomorrow. One evening, Rio quietly approached Kian while they both refilled battered canteens at a rusted spigot. Kian heard the concern in his voice before the boy even said, "Do you really think we'll make it?" Ario asked, looking at the partial silhouette of the sun in the sky. Kian took a moment, remembering the day he had saved Ario under that fallen beam, the library that became their fragile haven, the footprints that forced them to flee, and the tentative alliances formed in this camp. He didn't have a crystal ball, but he couldn't bear to lie either. "I don't know," he admitted, pressing on the spigot's handle until a dribble of water trickled out. "But it's better than giving up, and it's better than staying alone in that city, waiting for someone else to decide our fate." Rayo nodded slowly, eyes distant. After a moment he managed a small grin. "Then let's keep going." They shouldered their canteens and returned to the group. The fading light illuminated the dust in the air, a hazy sculpture of swirling particles dancing in the half-light. It was almost beautiful in its own bleak way. Each step across this twilight land was an act of faith. Among them were old and young, hopeful and desperate, but united by a single guiding dream. That somewhere ahead lay a place where the darkness wasn't so oppressive, where survival didn't always come at the cost of one's humanity. In this new age, no one could say what the future truly held, or if normal sunlight would ever return. Yet even an endless dusk could not snuff out the spark of human determination, nor the faint promise that somewhere, beyond the choking dust, a sunrise might still be waiting.